The New Mexico dust had been his only companion for 3 days, a fine red powder that caked his throat and settled in the creases of his leather chaps. Eli Maddox rode slow, his mare favoring her left fore, the pack mule behind her just as weary. The town rose from the flat expanse like a collection of broken teeth. Drybone. It was a name that promised nothing and delivered just that. He was not here for silver, and certainly not for comfort. He was here to close a ledger. The last one. Eli was a man who lived by finishing things. He'd spent the last 6 months finishing everything his brother, Ethan, had started and left undone. This was the final debt. A saloon marker for $25, owed to a man named Jedediah Crouch. Eli had the coin in his saddlebags, heavy and final. He tied the mare to a splintered hitching rail outside the arid heart. The name felt true. The batwing doors groaned as he pushed them open, and the light of the high desert afternoon was swallowed by the gloom. The saloon was nearly empty. It smelled of sour beer, old smoke, and something bitter, like resignation. 2 miners, their faces gray with ore dust, hunched over a table. A man who might have been old or just broken slept near a cold potbelly stove. Eli moved to the bar. There was no sign of a Jedediah Crouch, only a woman. She was wiping the scarred plank of the bar with a damp rag, her movements methodical and weary. Her hair, the color of wet sand, was pulled back so tight it stretched the skin at her temples. She did not look up. "I'm looking for Jedediah Crouch," Eli said. His voice was rough from the trail. The rag stopped moving. She looked up then, and he saw her eyes. They were a flat, hard gray, like a winter sky over the plains. "Mr. Crouch ain't seeing folk," she said. Her voice was low, with no music in it. He had a stroke, took his speech. "I'm not here to talk," Eli said. "I'm here to pay a debt for Ethan Maddox." Her eyes narrowed, just slightly. "Ethan Maddox is dead." "I know. I'm his brother, Eli." He motioned to his bags, still on the mare. He owed $25. A flicker of something, surprise, maybe, or just irritation, crossed her face. "I manage the books now." She dropped the rag into the bucket and wiped her hands on a canvas apron. "Get the money. I'll write the receipt." She moved from behind the bar toward a small, battered desk in the corner. She moved like a woman who had been on her feet for a dozen years without rest. Eli watched her. He was a quiet man, accustomed to watching. He watched cattle for signs of sickness, watched the sky for signs of weather, and he watched men for signs of trouble. This woman was closed up tighter than a fist. He went outside, the sun blinding him for a moment. He pulled the heavy leather pouch from his saddlebag and returned, the jingle of the coin loud in the quiet room. He placed the pouch on the bar. She came over, her face set. "My name is Willa Grant," she said, as if it were an admission. She didn't offer a hand. "Eli Maddox." She picked up the pouch. It was heavy, and she shifted her grip. As she turned to walk back to the desk, her fingers fumbled the leather tie. A single silver dollar slipped free, hit the edge of the bar, and rolled across the dusty floorboards. It spun twice and settled near the leg of the table where the miners sat. The miners stared at the coin. Eli stared at it. Willa let out a short, sharp breath. It was the sound of pure annoyance. She walked past the miners, who didn't move to help, and knelt to retrieve the coin. She bent low, her body stiff, reaching under the table. Her dress, a simple brown calico, was worn thin. The fabric pulled tight across the curve of her back, outlining her ribs and the sharp line of her hip. It was not a soft body, but it was a woman's body, and Eli felt a sudden, unexpected jolt, a warmth that had no place here. He forgot the money. He forgot his brother. He forgot the long ride and the name of the town. It wasn't just the shape of her, bent in the dim light. It was the way she held herself. As she angled her head to see the coin, a sliver of light from the dirty window caught her face. Her expression, focused on that lost dollar, was stripped bare. The hard gray of her eyes had softened into a deep, haunted stillness. It was an emptiness that spoke of things broken, of a loneliness so profound it swallowed the air around it. Then her fingers closed around the coin. She pushed herself up, her knees cracking faintly. The hardness snapped back into place like a steel trap. She brushed the dust from her skirt, her face impassive. She did not look at him. She walked to the desk, untied the pouch, and counted the silver. Her hands were rough, her knuckles raw. She counted quickly, professionally. She opened a thick ledger, dipped a pen in an inkwell, and scratched an entry. Ethan Maddox, she announced to the room. Paid in full, October 10th, 1882. It's 1883, Eli said quietly. She glanced at him, her eyes sharp. The debt was from last year. I closed the books as they were written. She blew on the ink, the small puff of air stirring the dust on the desk. She closed the ledger with a solid thud. She tore a scrap of paper from a notebook and wrote, Paid. W. Grant. She pushed it across the bar toward him. Eli folded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket. The business was done. He should have felt relief. Ethan's last tie to this world was cut. But Eli felt anchored, heavy. Appreciate your time, ma'am, he said, touching the brim of his hat. Willa Grant nodded once. She picked up the rag and went back to wiping the bar, as if he had already gone. Eli stood there. He should leave. He should get back on the mare and ride until Drybone was just another bad memory. But he couldn't seem to move his feet. He watched the repetitive motion of her hand, back and forth, back and forth. This town see much traffic? He asked. She didn't stop. Enough. You managing this place all on your own, with Mr. Crouch laid up? I manage. The words were clipped. They were not an invitation. They were a door slamming shut. He knew he was pushing, but the image of her eyes when she reached for that coin held him fast. It's hard country for a woman alone. The rag stopped. She set it down. She turned to him, and her eyes were not gray. They were steel. It's hard country for everyone. Mr. Maddox, I don't need reminding. Her voice was low, but it cut through the silence of the saloon. Your business here is concluded. The bar is open if you're buying. But I am not paid to talk. Eli held her gaze. He saw the wall she'd built. He recognized the materials. He'd used some of them himself. He gave a slow nod. Right. He turned toward the doors. He had one hand on the wood when a shout exploded from the street. You worthless scavenger. You think your claim is worth spit? It's worth more than your beef, you damn land grabber. Eli stepped back, pushing the door open just enough to see. Two men were in the street, chests puffed, faces red. One was a rancher, broad-shouldered and clean-shaven, his hand resting on an expensive-looking Colt. The other was a miner, thin as a starved coyote, holding a pickaxe handle. You miners are parasites. The rancher spat. Living off our water, digging holes, and leaving nothing. We were here first, the miner yelled, and swung the handle. The rancher dodged and the wood hit the dust. The rancher drew his pistol. That's enough. Eli was moving. He was out the door before the rancher could cock the hammer. Hold on, gents, Eli said, his voice even. He kept his hands open, away from his own sidearm. The day's too hot for this. Stay out of it, cowboy. The rancher snapped, his gun still leveled at the miner. I just paid a debt in that saloon, Eli said, his tone reasonable. I'd hate to see the windows shot out. Seems like bad business for the town. The rancher hesitated. He looked at Eli, taking in his worn clothes, the dust, and the calm way he stood. He saw a man who wasn't looking for a fight, but who wouldn't likely run from one. Eli glanced back at the saloon. The two miners had moved to the doorway, watching. Willa Grant stood exactly where she had been, behind the bar. She was looking at the man with the gun, her face pale but absolutely motionless. She wasn't scared. She was assessing. She was used to this. The realization settled on Eli like a weight. She was used to the raw edge of violence. The rancher lowered his pistol an inch. This sodbuster owes money all over. He's digging on land that ain't his. Then let the marshal sort it. Eli said, Shooting him won't get you paid. The rancher stared at Eli for a long, hard second. He cursed, shoved the pistol back into its holster, and jabbed a finger at the miner. "You watch yourself. We're done letting you rats pick this territory clean." He stormed off, his boots kicking up dust. The miner, shaking with adrenaline, spat on the ground. "Appreciate that, mister." He mumbled to Eli. "Just keep your head down," Eli said. He turned and went back into the arid heart. Willa was already back to wiping the bar. She didn't look at him. She didn't say thank you. She didn't acknowledge that anything had happened at all. Eli felt a strange prickle of irritation, followed by a reluctant wave of respect. She was as tough as saddle leather. "You rent rooms?" he asked. She looked up, surprised. "What?" "A room, for the night." "Above the saloon," she said, her tone flat again. 50 cents, in advance." He pulled a $50 from his pocket and set it on the bar. The coin was warm. She took the money, walked to the end of the bar, and unhooked a key with a brass tag. She slid it across the wood. "Number 2, top of the stairs. Don't make noise." She picked up her rag. Eli took the key. He had come to pay a debt and leave. Instead, he was paying 50 cents to sleep in a cheap room, all because of a woman who looked at him like he was a piece of grit she wanted to sweep away. He climbed the narrow stairs, the key heavy in his hand. The room was small, hot, and smelled of stale whiskey and old linens. The cot was narrow, the mattress thin. Eli didn't bother with the lamp. He sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The saloon below him came to life as the sun set. A piano, painfully out of tune, began to play. He heard the clink of glasses, the murmur of men, and then, later, the sharp, false laughter of the other girls who must have come to work. He lay back, his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. He thought of Ethan. He thought of the land they'd lost in Texas, the crooked surveyors, and the gunfire that had followed. He thought of the guilt he carried, a weight far heavier than the $25 he'd delivered. He'd been running from that gunfire for a year. He dozed, but it wasn't sleep. It was a restless drift. He was pulled awake by voices. It was late. The piano had stopped. The saloon should have been empty. A man's voice, thick and slurred, rose from the alley below his window. "I paid for a drink. Girly, not a sermon. You're paid to be nice." Eli sat up. He knew that voice. It was Hayes, the rancher from the street fight. He heard Willa's reply, low and cold. "The bar is closed. Mr. Hayes, go home. Your wife is waiting." "My wife," the man slurred, followed by a bitter, ugly laugh. "She ain't got what you got. Willa, hell, everyone in this territory knows what you are. The preacher's girl. Gone bad." Eli was off the bed, his boots hitting the floorboards. He moved toward the door. "Everyone knows you were run out of Santa Fe." Hayes sneered. "A used-up piece of—" The sound was not a gunshot. It was sharper, louder, and somehow more violent. It was the flat, wet crack of an open hand striking a man's face with all the force a body could muster. There was a grunt of pain and shock, a heavy thud, as if Hayes had stumbled back against the saloon wall. "Don't you ever—" Willa's voice cut through the night. It was shaking, not with fear, but with a white-hot rage that vibrated in the air. "Don't you ever speak of that. Get out of here. Get out, or I swear to God I'll fetch the scattergun from the bar." You crazy," Hayes sputtered. His voice suddenly sobered. "Get out!" Eli heard him stumble away, cursing, kicking a metal bucket that rang out in the alley. Then, a heavy wooden thunk as the back door was barred. Silence. Eli stood in the dark of his room, his hand on the brass doorknob. He hadn't needed to go down. She hadn't needed him. She had handled the rancher with a fury that was absolute. He walked to the window. The alley was black, just a narrow strip of dirt between the buildings. He could see nothing. He could only hear the wind whistling around the corner of the building, and the sound of his own heart beating. The preacher's girl, gone bad. He wondered what it cost her. That kind of strength. Dawn came cold and gray. Eli hadn't slept again. He packed his small bedroll, the sound of that slap still echoing in his head. He went downstairs. The saloon was cold and still. He left the key for room number 2 on the bar and stepped out into the sharp morning air. The stable was quiet, smelling of hay and horse. He found his mare and the mule. He paid the stable boy, who was sleeping in a pile of straw, and began to saddle his horse. He was checking the mare's hoof when a shadow fell over him. Willa Grant stood in the wide doorway of the livery. The morning light was harsh, illuminating the exhaustion on her face. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. She was holding the folded piece of paper, his receipt. "You forgot this," she said. Her voice was flat. Eli didn't stop his work, but he watched her from the corner of his eye. "I left the key." "I know." She held the paper out. "Take it." He finished with the hoof and straightened up. He looked at her hand. It was steady, but her eyes were warring with themselves. "You heard him last night," she stated. It was not a question. "I heard Hayes," Eli said. "And I heard you tell him to leave." Her jaw tightened. "Drybone isn't a good place for strangers, Mr. Maddox, especially strangers who get involved in street arguments and listen at windows. I was in the room I paid for. It's time for you to go." She stepped forward, pushing the receipt toward his chest. "Take it. Your brother's debt is paid. We don't have any more business." There it was, a faint, almost invisible tremble in her voice. It wasn't anger, not like last night. It was something else. It was fear. She wanted him gone. He realized, with a sudden clarity, that he was a threat, not because he might hurt her, but because he had seen her. He'd seen her bend, he'd seen her fight, and he'd heard the words that cut her. He was a witness. He looked at the small, folded paper in her hand. Then he looked at her face. "Keep it," he said, his voice quiet. He turned back to his mare, pulling the cinch tight. "Proof for your ledger, in case Hayes decides to come back and argue again." He heard her sharp intake of breath, but he didn't turn. He finished with the saddle, gathered the mule's lead rope, and led the animals out of the stable. He did not look at her as he passed. He swung up onto the mare. The town was quiet. A thin line of smoke rose from the blacksmith's chimney. He looked at the arid heart. The windows were dark. He'd done what he came to do. He was free of Ethan's past. This town, with its ranchers and its miners and its desperate, walled-off woman, was not his concern. He nudged the mare forward, the mule trotting behind. He rode past the last sun-scorched adobe hut, past the faded sign that welcomed no one. He rode out onto the high plain, the red sun just beginning to crest the eastern mesas. He put a mile between himself and Drybone. The town was just a smudge in the dust. He stopped. He didn't know why. He told himself he needed to check the mule's load. He told himself he needed to get his bearings. He turned in the saddle. He looked back at the small, crumbling town. He saw the saloon. He cursed, low and soft, at his own foolishness. He was a man running from ghosts. He had no business chasing a new one. He turned the mare's head away from the town. He kicked her sides, urging her into a trot, then a canter. He rode hard into the desert hills, toward the high, empty country, pushing the image of her haunted eyes out of his mind. But the image didn't go. It rode with him, clear as the morning light. 10 days passed, 10 days of heat and hard riding. Eli had delivered the small herd of longhorns to the railhead at Socorro, collected his pay, and was now working his way back north, checking a line of traps he'd set for beaver and fox. The high country was cold, a relief from the desert floor. He was good at this. He was good at being alone. The silence of the mountains was a clean, sharp thing. It was a world away from the sour, cramped confines of Drybone. He tried not to think of the town. He tried not to think of her. But the image of Willa Grant, her back bent, her eyes haunted, her hand striking a man in the dark. It was a burr under his saddle. It stuck. He had not intended to go back, but his line of traps ran close to the edge of the flats, and he needed supplies. He needed salt, coffee, and more shot for his rifle. He told himself it was just a stop for provisions. He'd be in and out in an hour. He rode into Drybone in the late afternoon. The town was quieter than he remembered, and the air was thick with something new. It wasn't just dust, it was tension. Men stood in small groups, their voices low and angry. He saw Hayes, the rancher, standing outside the assayer's office with two other broad-shouldered men. They looked like they owned the town, and they were looking to foreclose. Eli bought his supplies at the general store, his senses alert. He listened. The talk was all of water rights and claim jumping. The big outfits were pushing. He packed the salt and coffee onto his mule. It was done. He could leave. He should leave. But his feet, of their own accord, moved across the street. He found himself standing outside the arid heart. It was closed. The windows were dark, the doors barred. It wasn't yet sundown. A saloon closing early on a payday was a sign of sickness. He felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. He walked around the side, toward the alley. He heard it before he saw it. A man's voice, thick with whiskey and rage. "You think you're better than me? You're just the preacher's slut, serving drinks to men who are worth 10 of you." Then, Willa's voice, strained. "Get your hands off me. Gannon, I'm telling you, it's over. The saloon is closed." "It ain't over. You cut me off. In front of him. In front of Hayes." Eli turned the corner. A big miner, a man he recognized as Gannon, had Willa pinned against the back door. Her apron was torn. One hand was braced on his chest, pushing, but the man was twice her size. He had her other arm gripped tight, his face close to hers. "You're gonna learn respect," Gannon snarled, and he raised his free hand. "Let her go." Eli's voice was not loud. It was flat. It cut the air like a honed blade. Gannon froze. He turned his head, his eyes struggling to focus in the dim alley light. He saw Eli, standing 10 feet away, his hands at his sides, his duster pushed back. "Maddox," Gannon sneered, though his grip on Willa loosened. "This ain't your affair. Ride on." "I said, let her go." Eli took one slow step forward. He was not reaching for his gun. He did not need to. His eyes were fixed on the miner, and they were as cold and empty as the high country. Gannon looked at Eli. He looked at the coiled readiness in the man. He remembered the story of how Maddox had faced down Hayes in the street. Gannon was a drunk, but he was not a fool. He shoved Willa away from him. She stumbled, catching herself on the doorframe. "She ain't worth a bullet," Gannon spat. He jabbed a finger at her. "You watch your back, girl." He pushed past Eli, close enough that Eli could smell the sour whiskey on his breath. Gannon did not look back. He disappeared onto the main street. Eli did not watch him go. He looked at Willa. She was leaning against the wood, her eyes closed, her chest heaving. She was rubbing her arm where Gannon had held her. When she opened her eyes and saw him watching, her face hardened. She straightened up, pulling the torn edges of her apron together. "I didn't need your help," she said. Her voice was a rasp. "He was going to hit you. He's a drunk. He talks." She was embarrassed. He could see the flush of shame on her neck, a dull red that fought with her anger. She hated this. She hated him seeing her weak. Twice. "His hands were on you," Eli stated. It was a fact, plain and simple. She looked at her arm, then back at him, her eyes flashing. "And what are you? Eli Maddox? My protector? I've been in Drybone 2 years. I handle men like Gannon every week. Not tonight." He nodded to the door. "You're bleeding." She looked down. A small trickle of blood ran from her lip, where Gannon's stubble had scraped her. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, smearing it. She looked at the blood, and all the fight seemed to drain out of her, leaving only a vast, gray weariness. She fumbled with the key, her hand shaking so badly she couldn't fit it in the lock. Eli stepped forward. He did not ask. He took the key from her trembling fingers and unlocked the door. He pushed it open into the darkness of the saloon. "You ought to sit," he said. He followed her inside. She barred the door behind them, the heavy thud of the wood sounding final. The saloon was black. "Light a lamp," she whispered. Eli found the matches on the bar. He struck one. The small flame illuminated his face. Then the lamp on the bar. He lit the wick. A low, yellow light pushed back the shadows. It revealed the overturned chairs, the empty glasses, and it revealed her. She looked smaller in here, worn down. The hard shell she wore was cracked. He saw the relief in her eyes, a deep, shuddering relief that she was safe, and she hated it. Eli walked behind the bar, found a bottle of whiskey that was half full, and poured 2 glasses. He pushed one toward her. She stared at it. "I don't." "Tonight you do." She picked up the glass. Her hands were steady now. She drank. The whiskey was raw, and she coughed, but she drank it down. He drank his slower. They stood in the silence of the closed saloon. "Why are you here, Maddox?" she asked, her voice low. "I thought you were gone. Came for supplies," he said. "The town, it feels different." "It is." She looked away, toward the dark tables. "Hayes and the other ranchers, they're trying to starve us out. They're saying the silver claims are fraudulent. They're pushing. Gannon lost his claim this morning. That's why he was like that. He took it out on you. They all take it out on me." She said it with no self-pity. It was just a statement of fact. "Why do they call you that?" he asked, his voice quiet. "The name, Preacher's Girl." She was still. She looked down at her empty glass. He thought she wouldn't answer. He thought she would build the wall back up and tell him to go. She spoke to the glass. "Because it's true." Her voice was flat, all the life pressed out of it. "My father was Amos Grant. He was the most powerful preacher in Santa Fe. He spoke, and the territorial government listened. I was his daughter. I was proper. I was promised to a man, a politician, a man my father trusted." She paused, and her knuckles went white as she gripped the glass. "His name was Julian. He was handsome. He said all the right things. He told me he loved me, and I was a fool." Eli refilled her glass. She didn't seem to notice. "He wanted things before the wedding." "He said it was proof of my love. He said my father's God was a cold God, and our love was warm. I believed him." She took a sharp breath. "He was a liar. He was a rival of my father's. He wanted my father's congregation, his influence. He used me. He used what I gave him. He stood up in a public meeting, a week before our wedding, and confessed his sins. He told them everything, in detail. He painted me as a harlot, a serpent who had tempted him, a rot inside the preacher's own house." Eli watched her. He had seen men skinned. This was worse. It destroyed my father, not the shame, the betrayal. It broke his spirit. He stood at his pulpit the next Sunday, looked at me in the front pew, and preached a sermon on the whore of Babylon. He called me by that name. He disowned me in front of God and all of Santa Fe. He told me to go and never return. She was silent for a long time. "So I did. I walked out. I kept walking. I ended up here. Jedediah Crouch was sick. He didn't care about my name. He just needed someone who could read and count. So I managed the books. And I served the whiskey. And I listened." She finally looked at him. Her eyes were dry. There were no tears. There was nothing left to cry with. "So, now you know, I'm the preacher's girl, gone bad." Eli felt a cold anger settle in his stomach. An anger at Julian. An anger at her father. He looked at her, and he didn't see a harlot. He saw a soldier who had been left to die by her own command. He finished his whiskey. He set the glass down. "We all have a gone bad, Miss Grant," he said. She raised an eyebrow. You ride in, pay other men's debts, and save women in alleys. You don't seem like a man who's gone bad. Maddox, you seem like a man who's simple." "I'm running," he said. "That ain't simple." "Running from what? You paid your brother's debt?" "I paid his bar tab." Eli leaned on the bar, the wood cool beneath his hands. "I'm running from his death." "From the fact that I let him die?" He told her. He told her about the land in Texas, the green grass that ran down to the river. He told her about Ethan. his younger brother, full of fire and quick to laugh. He told her about the surveyors and the crooked deal. They sent men, hired guns. We knew they were coming. I told Ethan to pack, to leave. I said the land wasn't worth our blood. It was just dirt. We could find more. His voice grew rough. But Ethan, he was born there. He said you don't run from your own home. He was cleaning his rifle. I was outside, saddling the horses. I was going to make him leave. He stopped. He saw it, clear as the lamp in front of him. The dusk, the smell of the barn, the sound of the first shot. They rode in fast, 3 of them. I was by the horses. Ethan was still in the house. He came out, firing. He hit one, but the other 2, they shot him. He fell on the porch. I killed one of them. The other rode off. But it was too late. Ethan, he was gone. He bled out in my arms. He looked at me, right at the end. He said, "You were right, Eli." Then he died. Eli looked at his own hands, resting on the bar. He had washed them, but the blood felt like it was still there. I buried him. I set the house on fire. I took the horses and I rode. I've been running ever since. Running from that land, running from him saying I was right, because I wasn't. I should have been beside him. I should have fought with him, or I should have dragged him onto that horse, and he would still be alive. He looked at her. So, you see, you were cast out. I just ran away. A new silence settled between them. It was different. It was a silence of shared weight. They were 2 people in a dark room, each holding the wreckage of a life they had not asked for. Willa stared at his hand on the bar. It was a strong hand, calloused from reins and rope, stained with his work. It was the hand that had held a dying brother. She reached out. Her fingers, small and rough, brushed the back of his hand. It was not a saloon girl's touch. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was a gesture of recognition. She was just touching him to see if he was real. The moment her skin touched his, a jolt went through him, hot and sharp. It was not like the feeling he'd had when she bent for the coin. This was different. This was alive. His hand reacted before his mind. He turned it over, fast, and caught her wrist. He didn't mean to. It was an instinct, a drowning man grabbing a rope. She froze. Her eyes flew to his. He held her. He didn't tighten his grip. He didn't let go. He just held her wrist. He could feel her pulse, a frantic bird's wing beating against his thumb. He looked at her mouth, at the small cut on her lip. He looked at her eyes, wide and startled. And for the first time, the gray was not flat. It was deep, and he could see the fear in it, and the exhaustion, and something else. Something that matched the raw, frustrated longing inside him. The air in the saloon was too thick to breathe. The single lamp flame guttered. She pulled her hand back. She did it slowly. A deliberate, quiet tug. He let her go. His fingers felt branded. "It's late, Eli," she whispered. Her voice was not steady. "Yes," he cleared his throat. I have a camp. In the hills." He put a coin on the bar for the whiskey. She looked at it like it was a snake. "Don't," she said. "Don't pay me. Not for this." He took the coin back. He walked to the door. He did not unbar it. He turned back to her. She was still standing behind the bar, her arms wrapped around herself, as if she were holding her own broken pieces together. "Good night, Willa," he said. "Good night, Maddox." He unbarred the door and slipped out into the cold night. He did not look back. He made it to his camp, a small fire in a hollow of rocks. His horse and mule nickered at his return. He did not bother with his bedroll. He sat against a boulder and stared into the flames. He felt undone. The wall he had built around Ethan's death, the wall of work and riding and silence, had been breached by her story, by the feel of her pulse under his thumb. He finally slept, slumped against the rock, and he dreamed. He was in the saloon again. The coin rolled. She bent to get it. The brown calico pulled tight. He felt the jolt, the familiar, shameful heat. But this time, in the dream, when she stood up, She did not go to the desk. She turned to him. Her hair was down, loose over her shoulders. The haunted look was gone. Her eyes were dark, and they were full of a terrible, aching need. She walked to him. She did not speak. She reached out and put her hand on his cheek. Her hand was cool. She leaned in, and he could smell the whiskey on her breath and soap. She bent toward him, not to pick up a coin, to touch him, to kiss him. He woke with a gasp, his heart hammering. The fire was dead, just a pile of gray ash. The sky was turning a faint, sick purple. He was covered in a cold sweat. He stood up, frustrated and angry. He was angry at the dream, at the longing that was a physical ache in his gut. He felt ashamed. He was a man mourning his brother. He had no right to feel this. He had no right to want, especially not her. A woman who was so broken, so used. The thought made him sick. He kicked dirt onto the dead embers. 2 days later, and miles away, Willa Grant left the saloon in the middle of the afternoon. She told the stable boy she was walking. She took nothing with her. She walked out of Dry Bone, past the last houses, into the desert. She followed a dry creek bed for a mile, until she came to the ruins. It had been a church, once, built by hopeful miners 10 years ago. A fire had taken it. All that was left were the low, crumbling adobe walls and a single charred crossbeam, fallen at an angle. This was the broken altar. Willa stood in the roofless silence. The wind whispered through the dead mesquite. She looked at the toppled cross. This was her father's world, a ruin. She pulled a small, tallow candle from her pocket, and a match. She lit the candle, dripping hot wax onto the flat stone of the altar to make it stand. The small flame wavered in the breeze. She did not kneel. She stood, her hands clenched at her sides. She stared at the flame. Her lips moved, but she made no sound. She was praying. She was not praying for forgiveness. She was long past that. She was not praying for help. She was begging for silence. "Let me be," she whispered, the words torn from her. "Let me alone. Let me go back to how it was. Don't make me feel this." She was not talking to God. She was talking to the past. She was talking to the memory of Julian and the ghost of her father. And she was talking to the new ghost, the one with the quiet voice and the eyes that saw too much, the one who had held her wrist and made her feel, for one terrifying second, that she was not dead. She wanted the numbness back. The numbness was safe. She stayed until the candle burned down, the flame sputtering in its own wax. She watched it die. Then she turned and walked back to Dry Bone. That same evening, miles away in the high hills, Eli sat with a man named Tobin. Tobin was half Comanche, a scout who knew the land better than the Hawks. They shared coffee and tobacco. "You were in Dry Bone." Tobin said. It wasn't a question. "Supplies," Eli said. Tobin grunted. He stared into their small fire. "It's bad down there. Eli, the big cattle outfits. Hayes, his partners. They're pushing hard. They're not just threatening anymore." Eli went still. "What do you mean?" "They're pressuring the miners, the small folk, to sell out, offering pennies. Those who refuse, trouble finds them. A mule goes missing. A well gets fouled." Tobin tossed a stick into the fire. "Heard this morning a homesteader's line shack was burned. Man's lucky to be alive. They're squeezing the town. They want it all. They want it empty." Eli stared into the flames. He saw the saloon. He saw Hayes sneering at Willa in the alley. He saw Gannon, his hands on her. He saw the town, fragile and tense. And he saw Willa, alone in the middle of it. A woman who had been disowned by her father, ruined by her fiancé, and now was being crushed between the greed of ranchers and the anger of miners. He had run from his brother's death. He had told himself he was done with other people's fights. He looked at Tobin. "How bad?" "It's gonna get worse," Tobin said, his voice flat. "Before it gets better." Eli cursed, low and soft. He looked south toward the dark expanse where Dry Bone lay, a single point of trouble in the vast, empty dark. He was a man who had come to pay a debt and found himself tangled in a new one. He rode back 2 days later, the news from Tobin sitting like a cold stone in his stomach. He'd told himself he was just checking his trap line, but he'd ridden past every one. He was a liar. He was a man being pulled by a string, and the string led to the arid heart. He came in at midday. The town was tight as a clenched fist. The air of tension had turned sour, into a low, simmering fear. Men watched him from the shadows of storefronts. Drybone was a town holding its breath, waiting for the axe to fall. He found her inside, same as always, wiping the bar. The saloon was empty save for a single old prospector nursing a beer in the corner. Willa looked up when his shadow fell across the floor. Her eyes registered three things, one right after the other: surprise, irritation, and beneath that, a flicker of something she quickly hid. "You're back," she said. It was not a welcome. "I heard about a fire, a homesteader's shack," Eli said, standing on the other side of the bar. "Word travels." She dipped her rag in the bucket and kept wiping. "I heard Hayes and his men are pushing hard, squeezing. Is that true?" She stopped. She turned to him, her face a hard mask. "What if it is? Maddox, you going to ride in like a lawman and clean up the town? We don't have a lawman. We just have men with money and men with holes in the ground. And me. Willa, it's not just talk," Tobin said. "I don't care what your scout said." Her voice was sharp. "I know how to survive. I survived Santa Fe. I survived my father's sermons. I can survive a few loud-mouthed ranchers." "This is different," he insisted, his voice low. "They're not just loud. They're burning people out. I've survived worse." She snapped. Just then, the old prospector pushed himself up from the table. He shuffled to the bar and dropped a nickel and a dime onto the wood. "For the beer, Miss Willa." "Thank you, Silas." Her voice was tight. She turned to the small cash box she kept under the bar. She unlocked it. Eli watched her. Her hand, the one that had held the key so steady, that had struck Hayes with such precision, was shaking. She fumbled with the coins, trying to slide the nickel into its slot. She dropped it. The coin clattered on the floor and rolled under the bar. She cursed, a small, vicious sound. She bent to get it. Eli said nothing. He just watched her. He saw her knuckles, white as she gripped the edge of the cash box. He saw the tremble that ran up her arm. She was terrified. She found the coin and stood, her face pale with fury and humiliation. She knew he'd seen. "I'm tired," she said, slamming the cash box shut. "That's all. Willa, go away. Eli, I mean it. I don't want your help." "I don't need your protection. I've got work to do." He stood there for a long moment, the quiet anger radiating off her. He had come to help, but she had walled him out so completely, he felt like a fool. He was a stranger here. He was a stranger to her. He had no right. "Fine," he said. He turned and walked out. He went to the stable. He saddled his mare. He was angry at her, and angrier at himself for caring. He'd done what he could. He'd offered. She had refused. It was done. He mounted up and rode out, past the assayer's office, past the edge of town. He rode until Drybone was just a collection of small, brown squares in the distance. He stopped. The mare tossed her head, impatient. He looked at the hills, the open country that promised silence and solitude. That's where he belonged. He thought of Ethan, bleeding out on the porch, saying, "You were right, Eli." He had been right. Running was smart. Running was survival. But Willa wasn't running. She was standing her ground, on a patch of dirt that wasn't even hers, armed with nothing but a ledger book and a rage she wore like armor. And she was lying about being tired. Her hand was shaking. He cursed, a low, guttural sound that the wind snatched away. He pulled the mare's head around. He just couldn't. He rode back. When he walked into the saloon, she was in the same spot. She didn't look up, as if she knew his leaving had been false. He put a 50-cent piece on the bar, the same as before. "A room," he said. "For the night." She finally looked at him. Her eyes were hard, but the fight was gone. She just looked beaten. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I'm tired of riding." He said it was the only truth he had. She took the coin. She got the key for room number 2. She slid it across the bar. "Don't expect me to thank you." He took the key and went upstairs. He sat on the narrow cot. He listened. The afternoon died. The sun went down. The saloon below filled up. He heard the piano, the same sour notes. He heard the clink of glass, the roar of men's voices. He heard her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the noise. "You've had enough, Gannon. 2 bits, mister. No credit." He waited. It went late. The crowd thinned. The piano stopped. One by one, the men left, their voices fading into the night. He heard the chairs being dragged across the floor. He heard the heavy thud of the front bar being dropped into its brace. The lock on the back door clicked. Silence. He stood up. He walked down the stairs. The saloon was dark, lit by a single lamp she had left burning on the bar. She was not there. He thought maybe she had gone to her own room, locking him out of her life for the night. He walked to the bar, standing in the small pool of yellow light. He was about to pour himself a whiskey he didn't want when he heard a sound from the back. She emerged from the storeroom, holding the heavy ledger. She stopped dead when she saw him. Her hand went to her chest. "You startled me," she said. I was waiting." She put the ledger on the desk. She did not look at him. She began to untie her apron. "You should be asleep." "I couldn't." She finished with the apron, folding it into a neat square, a nightly ritual. Her hands were steady now. The saloon was locked. The danger, for now, was outside. "What do you want, Eli?" she asked the folded apron. "I don't know." She finally turned. She looked at him, her face softened by the lamplight, the hard lines eased by exhaustion. "You're a fool," she said, her voice quiet. "Staying here. You get yourself killed over a town that's already dead. Over a woman who—" She stopped. "A woman who what?" She walked toward him. She stopped a few feet away. "You're a good man. Eli Maddox. You paid your brother's debt. That's rare. Most men just run from what they owe." "I've run from plenty," he said, "but not this." She looked at him, her gray eyes searching his. "You look at me, and you don't look at me like the others. You don't see a saloon girl. You don't see the preacher's slut. What do you see?" He was silent. He saw the curve of her back as she bent for the coin. He saw her eyes, haunted and still. He saw her hand strike haze. He saw her tremble as she counted the change. He reached out. He had wanted to do this since he'd seen her, since that first day. A wisp of her hair had come loose from its tight bun. It fell against her temple. His hand was rough, calloused, but his touch was light. He brushed the hair from her cheek, his fingers grazing her skin. She closed her eyes. Her breath shuddered. She leaned into his touch, just for a second, a movement so small he almost missed it. She opened her eyes. They were dark, full of a terrible, bottomless fear. She spoke, and her voice was a whisper, so low he had to lean in to hear it. "If you touch me," she said, her voice trembling. "How would you do it?" He didn't understand. "Willa." "No?" She looked him straight in the eye, her gaze unflinching, though her body was shaking. If we, would you touch me like a woman? Or like a whore?" The question hung in the air, a blade pressed against his throat. It was the question of her life, the sum of her shame. Julian, her father, Gannon, every man who had looked at her with contempt or raw lust. He knew, in that moment, that words were useless. Words were what Julian had used to ruin her. Words were what her father had used to cast her out. He did not speak. He looked at her mouth, the small cut on her lip long since healed. He looked at her eyes, so desperate for an answer that was not a lie. He leaned in, slow. He gave her time to pull away. She didn't move. She just watched him. Her breath held. He kissed her. It was not a hungry kiss. It was not the desperate, fumbling kiss of a lonely man. It was firm. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was an answer. It was a vow. He kissed her with a tenderness he hadn't known he possessed. He kissed her as if she were the only thing in the room, as if she were real. He broke the kiss. He rested his forehead against hers. Her eyes were closed. A single tear was tracking its way down her cheek. He took her hand. It was cold. He interlaced his fingers with hers. "Come," he said, his voice thick. He led her, not to his room. He led her down the hall to the last door. Her room. She unlocked it and they stepped inside. Her room was nothing like the one he'd rented. It was plain, but it was clean. There was a small iron bed, a washstand, and a single, locked wooden chest. The air smelled of lye soap and, faintly, of her. She stood in the middle of the room, trembling like a leaf. She was terrified. This was the one place she was safe, and she had brought him into it. She turned her back to him. She began, with stiff, mechanical motions, to unbutton the collar of her dress. She was preparing herself. She was bracing for a job. "No," he said, his voice rough. He stepped up behind her. He put his hands on her shoulders. She flinched, but he held her. "Stop," he whispered. "Not like that." He turned her around. Her eyes were wide, confused. He lifted his hands to her face. He cupped her jaw. "Willa." He kissed her again. And this time, the desperation was there. It was his, and it was hers. She kissed him back. A sudden, breaking flood of hunger and loneliness and fear. Her hands came up, grabbing his shirt, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was trying to wash her away. It was not tender. It was intense. It was a raw, aching need. It was two people who had been alone for so long. They had forgotten what it felt like to be touched. He unlaced her dress, his hands clumsy. She fumbled with the buttons of his shirt. It was a collision, a desperate, wordless bargain. He lifted her, and she was light. He carried her to the bed. Later, in the deep quiet of the night, the lamp burned low. She lay beside him, her back to him. He was awake. He watched her. She was so still. He thought she might be sleeping, but he knew she wasn't. He knew she was on the other side of that night, lost in the shame and the relief. He saw her back. Her thin night shift was rucked up slightly at her waist, and he saw them. In the dim yellow light, he saw the scars, a ladder of pale, silvery lines running from her shoulder blade down to her waist. They were old. He touched one, lightly, with the tip of his finger. It was not a whip. It was a strap, a belt, a cold. Sick rage filled him. He thought of Julian. He thought of her father, the preacher. He didn't ask. He didn't say a word. To ask would be to make her relive it. To ask would be a violence. He just moved. He lay down beside her, his chest pressing against her scarred back. He put his arm over her, pulling her close. He held her. He felt the small, silent tremors that ran through her. She was crying. He said nothing. He just held her, his body a solid, warm line against hers, a silent guard against the night, and the men who had left those marks. Morning came too soon, a cold, gray light that bled through the thin curtains. He woke first. He was alone in the bed. He sat up. He heard a sound. Willa was standing by the window, already dressed in her brown calico. The armor was back in place. She was staring down at the street. "You should go," she said, her voice flat. She didn't look at him. "Get your horse. Ride out before the sun is all the way up." "Willa, last night was a mistake," she said, her voice brittle. "It was whiskey and fear. It meant nothing. You know that's not true." He stood, pulling on his trousers. "What is true, Eli?" She turned on him, her face pale, but her eyes burning. "That doesn't change anything. It doesn't stop Hayes. It doesn't save this town." "I'm not leaving you," he said. "I don't need—" She was cut off by a shout from the street, a woman's scream, high and terrified. Eli was at the window in 2 strides. He looked down. The town was in chaos. Men were running toward the livery. A thick column of black smoke was rising from the south end of town. "That's the Miller homestead," Willa whispered, her hand at her mouth. "They burned it. They burned the whole place." Eli was pulling on his boots. He grabbed his shirt. "Stay here," he said. "Lock this door." "Eli, no!" He was out the door and down the stairs. He burst through the bat-wing doors of the saloon into the pandemonium. The fire was bad, but that wasn't what had caused the scream. A group of men were gathered near the water trough. Eli pushed his way through. He saw him. It was Gannon, the miner who had grabbed Willa in the alley. He was hanging. He was dangling from the beam of the blacksmith's shop, a piece of frayed rope around his neck. His eyes were open, bulging. His boots were 6 inches from the ground. A sign was pinned to his shirt. "Thief!" "It's a lie," a miner shouted. "Gannon didn't steal. It's murder," another whispered, his face sick. Eli turned. Hayes and his men were standing on the boardwalk outside the assayer's office. They were watching. Hayes was drinking a cup of coffee, his expression calm. He met Eli's gaze across the street. He smiled. Eli felt a coldness spread through him that had nothing to do with the morning air. He turned and went back inside. Willa was at the bottom of the stairs, her face ashen. "Who?" she asked. "Gannon. They hanged him." She closed her eyes. "Oh, God. Oh, God." She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in like claws. You see? This is what they do. This is who they are. They kill. They don't care." "Willa, calm down." "No!" She was frantic, her eyes wild with terror. She wasn't afraid for herself, he realized. She was afraid for him. "He saw you, Hayes. He saw you stand up to Gannon. He saw you ride back. He knows you're with me. You'll be next. Eli, please, please, you have to go." She was begging him, pulling at his shirt. "Take your horse and ride. Don't look back. Please." He put his hands on her shoulders. He looked at her, at this woman who had survived so much, now breaking apart for his sake. "I'm not running," he said, his voice low and hard. "Not this time. I am done running from injustice." He was thinking of Ethan. He was thinking of the scars on her back. It was the worst possible thing he could have said. Her face changed. The fear vanished, replaced by a sudden, cold fury. She slapped his hands away. "Injustice?" she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "Is that what you call it? You think you're some hero from a dime novel?" "Willa, that's not what I—" "Don't you dare," she said, jabbing a finger at his chest. "Don't you dare use me to feel righteous. Don't you use my town, my fear, as a way to wash away your brother's ghost. You're not here for me. You're here for you. You're just looking for a clean way to die. Go find it somewhere else." The accusation struck him, harder than Gannon's fist, because he knew, deep down, that a part of it was true. He had no answer. He just stared at her, at the raw, painful truth she had thrown at him. "Go," she whispered. He looked at her for a long, silent moment. He saw the pain behind her anger. He saw that she was driving him away to save him. And he knew she was right. Not about his motives, not all of them, but about the danger. He turned. He walked out of the saloon. Hayes watched him, a victorious smirk on his face. Eli went to the stable. He saddled his mare. He did not look back. He rode out of Drybone, the smoke from the Miller homestead staining the morning sky. Willa watched him go from the saloon's dirty window. She watched until he was just a speck, until he disappeared into the hills. The saloon was empty. She was alone. She turned. She walked, her legs stiff, to the storeroom. She went inside, into the darkness that smelled of sour beer and grain. She slid the heavy wooden bar across the door, locking herself in. She leaned against the rough wood. She closed her eyes. She did not sob. She did not wail. She just stood in the dark, and for the first time since her father had called her a whore in front of God, she let the tears come. They fell, hot and silent, onto the dusty floorboards. She had saved him, and it had cost her the only thing she had left. The storeroom was cold. Willa stayed in the dark until her tears ran dry, leaving trails of salt on her dusty cheeks. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than the sacks of grain she leaned against. He was gone. She had done it. She had saved him by driving him away, and the victory felt exactly like death. She did not know how long she sat there. An hour, maybe 2. But survival was a habit ground deep in her bones. The saloon would open. It always opened. Jedediah Crouch, upstairs in his silent, paralyzed body, still needed to be fed. The world did not stop just because hers had. She pushed herself up, her knees aching. She unbarred the door and stepped into the cold, empty saloon. The air was sour with the smell of last night's spilled beer and fear. She looked at the street. Gannon's body was gone, but the rope was still there, swinging gently from the blacksmith's beam, a question mark hanging over the town. She went upstairs. She washed her face, retied her hair, and put on her canvas apron. The armor, but the day was wrong. The saloon opened, but no one came. Not the miners, who were hiding in their shacks, terrified they were next. Not the ranchers, who were celebrating their victory at Hayes's private spread. Drybone was a ghost town, and she was its only ghost. Around noon, a man she did not recognize pushed through the batwing doors. He was not a miner. He was not a rancher. He wore a decent suit under his duster, and a territorial marshal's badge pinned to his vest. He was clean-shaven, with cold, assessing eyes. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat. He did not remove his hat. "I'm Marshal Brody, from Albuquerque. We've got no business for you," Willa said, her hands gripping the bar. "I think you do. A man was lynched here this morning." "I saw. Silas Gannon." Brody pulled a small notebook from his pocket. "I've been talking to folks. Mr. Hayes, chief among them. He runs the Cattlemen's Association here." "He runs this town," Willa said, her voice bitter. Brody's eyes narrowed. "So I gather. He says Gannon was a thief, caught rustling. Says the miners are all thieves, digging on his land. Gannon was a drunk and a fool. Marshal, he wasn't a thief." "No." Brody took a step closer. "But he was a troublemaker. I heard, for instance, that he gave you trouble. Put his hands on you, right in the alley." Willa's blood went cold. "Who told you that?" "The town talks, especially about you. Miss Grant." His eyes raked over her, cold and insulting. "They say a lot. They say Gannon was bothering you. And then I hear about this other man, this drifter, Maddox, the one who defended you in the street, the one who ran Gannon off. That had nothing to do with—" "And then," Brody continued, his voice hardening, "Gannon turns up dead, hanged. And your man, Maddox, he rides out of town at a full gallop, right after the body is found." Willa felt the trap closing. She could not breathe. "That looks bad, Miss Grant," Brody said, his voice a low sneer. "It looks like Gannon bothered you, so your new fellow shut him up, permanently. And then he ran. It looks like you're the cause of all this." "That's a lie. Eli, Mr. Maddox, he didn't kill anyone. He left because I told him to. Because of the violence. Because of Hayes." "Because of Hayes. Or because the job was done." Brody snapped the notebook shut. "You're the preacher's daughter, ain't you? I've heard that story. You bring trouble with you. Like a sickness." "Get out," Willa whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "Mr. Hayes is a reasonable man. He's trying to keep order here. He thinks Gannon was a thief, but I think it's something else. I think it's you. You stay put. Miss Grant, I'm not done with this. I'm not done with you." He turned and left. Willa stood there, her knuckles white on the bar. Hayes wasn't just driving her out. He was framing her. He was painting her as the Black Widow, the cursed woman who had brought a killer to Drybone to settle her scores. The town, already suspicious, already whispering, would believe it. She was the perfect scapegoat. She was alone, and Eli was gone. Eli had made it 10 miles. 10 miles of hard riding, his mare lathered, his mind black. "You're just looking for a clean way to die." Her words were acid. They burned because they were true. He had been running from Ethan's ghost, and he'd been so desperate to prove he wasn't a coward that he'd nearly become one. Using her trouble as his excuse, he made a cold camp by a small seep, a place Tobin had showed him. He didn't build a fire. He sat in the dusk, chewing on a piece of dry jerky, hating her, hating himself, hating the empty, aching silence. He was just rolling out his bedroll when a horse approached, quiet as an owl's shadow. It was Tobin. The scout swung down, his face grim in the moonlight. "You're a fool, Eli," Tobin said. "I'm beginning to think you're right. You left her after they strung up Gannon. You left her alone." She drove me out," Eli snapped, his frustration boiling over. She said I was just using her to feel righteous." Tobin grunted. "Maybe you were, but that ain't the point. You're gone, and Hayes is moving." Eli went still. "What do you mean?" "I was on the ridge. I saw a marshal rode in. Name's Brody. He went straight to Hayes. Then he went to the saloon. I circled back, listened. The whispers are everywhere. Eli, Hayes is feeding him a story." "What story?" "That Gannon wasn't a thief, that he was just a man who got crossways with the saloon girl. They're saying Gannon was harassing you. So your new man, that's you, Eli, killed him for it. Then you rode out, like a coward, leaving her to face the music." Eli felt the blood drain from his face. "They're pinning it on you," Tobin said, his voice flat. "And on her. They're saying she's cursed, that she's the one who brought this death. They're turning the whole town against her. She's alone. Eli. And that marshal? He looks like a man who believes the ugliest story he hears." Eli was already moving. He kicked his bedroll aside. He grabbed his saddle. The cursed preacher's girl. Hayes had yelled it in the alley. Now he was making it true. He was making her the center of it all. The poison. "Eli," Tobin said, his voice sharp. "Think, this is a trap. This is what Hayes wants. He knows you. He knows you'll come back for her. He'll have Brody arrest you for murder, or his own men will just shoot you in the street. You ride back in. You're a dead man." Eli swung the saddle onto the mare's back. He pulled the cinch tight, his movements quick and violent. "I don't care," he said, the words a low growl. He was done thinking. He was done running. He was done being right. "I'm going back." He swung into the saddle. "You coming?" Tobin watched him for a long, silent second. He saw the ghost that had been riding with Eli for a year. And he saw that, for the first time, Eli wasn't looking back at it. He was looking forward. Tobin sighed. "Damn you, Eli!" He mounted his own horse. "I'll watch your back, but you're kicking a wasp's nest." "I'm burning it," Eli said. They rode. They rode hard, the hooves of their horses swallowing the dark miles. Willa had not lit the lamps. The arid heart was dark. She was sitting at the small desk, the ledger open, but she was not writing. She was just staring at the empty page. The batwing doors flew open, crashing against the saloon walls. Marshal Brody stood there, and behind him, Hayes, and 4 of his men, their hands on their guns. They fanned out, blocking the entrance. The townspeople, sensing a final, bloody act, gathered in the street behind them. "Miss Grant," Brody said, his voice booming for the crowd. "It's over." "I've done nothing," Willa said, standing. Her chair scraped on the floor. "We have a witness, Mr. Hayes here." Hayes stepped forward, his face a mask of false piety. "He says he saw your man, Maddox, threaten Silas Gannon's life just 2 days ago. Said he'd kill him if he ever touched you again." "That's a lie," Willa screamed. "And now Gannon's dead," Hayes said, his voice full of regret. "And your man is fled. It's a tragedy. This town was peaceful until you 2 brought your darkness. Here." Willa looked at the men. Their faces were hard. They were going to drag her out. They were going to hang her. Or worse. She was trapped. "Where is he? Miss Grant," Brody demanded. "Where's your killer?" "Right here." The voice came from the street. The crowd parted, murmuring, terrified. Eli Maddox walked through the crowd. Tobin was behind him, a shadow. Eli stepped through the batwing doors. He was covered in dust, his eyes burning with a cold fire. He walked past Brody, past Hayes, until he was standing at the bar, right beside Willa. He had made his choice. He was standing with her. "You were saying something about me, Hayes?" Eli's voice was dangerously quiet. Brody spun, his hand dropping to his gun. "Eli Maddox, you're under arrest for the murder of Silas Gannon." "Am I?" Eli said. He did not look at the marshal. He looked straight at Hayes. "I didn't kill Gannon, and neither did she." "Then why'd you run?" Brody challenged. "I left, but I came back." His gaze was locked on Hayes. "Gannon wasn't a thief. He was just a man who got in your way. Like the Millers, whose homestead you burned. You hanged him. Hayes, you and your men, you're the murderer, not me." A collective gasp from the street. This was open war. Hayes, for the first time, looked uncertain, but he recovered and laughed. "Brave words, cowboy. But you've got no proof. All I see is a drifter defending a woman of ill repute. A cursed woman." The whispers started, ugly and loud. "Lying down with the cursed preacher's girl. He's as bad as she is. They'll hang them both." Willa flinched, the words striking her like stones, but Eli did not move. He did not even look at the crowd. "I don't care what you call her," Eli said, his voice ringing with a cold, final authority. "And I don't care what you call me. You're a land thief and a killer, and you—" He jabbed a finger at Brody. "You're his dog on a leash." Brody's face went purple. He drew his pistol. "That's enough. Maddox, hands up. You're under arrest." "On what charge?" Eli said, his hands staying at his sides. "You've got no proof. You've got no witnesses. You just have his word." He gestured to Hayes. "This town knows who Hayes is. They're just too scared to say it, but I'm not—" "Go on. Marshal, shoot me. Shoot an unarmed man. Right in front of the whole town. See how that looks in your report." It was a stalemate. Brody looked at Hayes. Hayes was furious. This wasn't the plan. Killing Eli in a fair fight was one thing. Executing him was another. Brody slowly lowered his gun. "You're on thin ice. Cowboy, one wrong move. I'll get the proof I need. You stay in this town." "I plan to," Eli said. Brody turned, furious. "Clear out! Go home!" He and Hayes and his men stalked out of the saloon, shoving through the stunned crowd. The saloon was silent. The crowd melted away, whispering, afraid. Eli and Willa were alone. She was shaking. Her whole body was trembling, her teeth chattering. "You fool," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You damn fool. They will kill you. They will kill you for this." "Let them try." He turned, and for the first time, he looked at her. "Why?" she cried, the word tearing out of her. "Why did you come back? I called you a coward. I said those terrible things. I meant them." "I know," he said. "I know why you said them." "Then why?" she demanded. She hit his chest, her fist a weak, defeated blow. "Why?" He caught her wrist, the same way he had that first night they talked. He held it, his grip firm. He looked at her, his eyes stripping away all her armor. "Because I remember how you looked when you bent to pick up that coin," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he could no longer name. "And I ain't been right since—" The simple, honest truth of it broke her. All her walls, all the anger, all the fear. It just shattered. She sagged against him, her face burying itself in his dusty, sweat-stained shirt. "Eli," she choked out, her hands grabbing his arms, holding on. He wrapped his arms around her. He held her. He held her as she shook, his chin resting on the top of her head. He had come to pay a debt. He had found something else entirely. That night, the saloon was locked and barred, the front and the back. They were in her room. It was different from the first time. There was no desperation, no raw, colliding hunger. He lit the lamp. He did not move toward her. He just looked at her. She was afraid. He could see it. She was standing by the washstand, her arms crossed, holding herself. He walked to her. He kissed her. A long, silent kiss that tasted of dust and fear and a terrible, profound relief. It was a promise. She kissed him back, her mouth trembling, but yielding. Her hands were shaking. She reached for the buttons of his shirt. He put his hands over hers, stilling them. "It's all right," he whispered. "I'm here." Her touch, it trembled, but her need for him, for this one true, solid thing in her broken world, it overcame her fear. She did not brace herself. She did not turn away. He undressed her slowly, as if she were something precious. He kissed her mouth, her cheek, her throat. When she stood before him in the lamplight, he did not look away. He looked at the scars on her back. He traced the silvery lines with his fingers. She did not flinch. He lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bed. It was a slower, deeper claiming. It was a night of silent, emotional vows, a healing. It was two scarred people finding a place to rest. In the first gray light of morning, she was not turned away. She was curled against his side, his arm heavy and warm around her. She had not slept. She had just rested. He was awake, watching her. His fingers gently traced the line of her jaw. "You told me about him," Eli said, his voice quiet in the dawn. "The politician, Julian." She tensed, but she did not pull away. "Yes, you said he ruined you." She was silent for a long moment. He had come back. He had faced down Hayes. He had risked his life, his name. He deserved the whole truth, the part she had never told anyone. She sat up, pulling the thin sheet around her. "I loved him," she whispered, her voice raw. I thought he was my salvation, my father. He was a hard man, a man of fire and rules. Julian was warm. He said my father's God was a God of fear. But our love it was a God of joy." He made me believe him. Eli watched her, his expression unreadable, his jaw tight. "He had a rival," she continued, her voice gaining a bitter strength. "A man named Bishop. He wanted my father's church. He wanted his influence. Julian was working for Bishop. The entire time." Eli's hand, lying on the blanket, clenched into a white-knuckled fist. "He didn't just confess his sins, Eli," she said, her voice breaking. "He sold my story. He sold my private letters. He sold the details of our nights. He gave them to Bishop, and Bishop read them. He read them aloud, in a public meeting, to the elders of the church. He said my father was a hypocrite, raising a harlot in his own home. He used my own words, my private, foolish, loving words, to destroy my father." She was crying now, the broken, silent sobs he had heard in the dark. It wasn't just the shame, it was the proof. My father, he saw the letters, he saw my handwriting. That's when he broke. That's when he called me the whore of Babylon. He didn't just cast me out, he took his belt. She couldn't say it. She stopped, her hand gesturing weakly to her back. Eli's face was stone. He moved. He didn't offer empty words. He didn't tell her it was all right. He pulled her to him. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight as she cried into his shoulder. He rocked her, his hand stroking her hair. He kissed her forehead, his lips brushing away the tears. "It doesn't matter," he whispered, his voice thick with a rage she had never heard. "I don't care what they call you. I don't care what he did. I don't care what any of them say." He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. "You're the only true thing in this whole damn town. Do you hear me? The only one." She held on to him, her sobs finally quieting. He had heard the ugliest part of her, and he had not run. They dressed in the quiet of the morning. There was a new feeling in the room. It was not fear, it was resolve. "We can't win," Willa said, her voice stronger. She was buttoning her dress, the armor. "We can't beat Hayes, not with guns. He has Brody, he has too many men." "We don't beat him with guns," Eli said, pulling on his boots. "We beat him with the truth, the real truth. Brody won't listen. He's paid for. Then we don't tell Brody. We tell the town. We tell the territory. Hayes is a land thief. He's grabbing claims. He's a murderer. We just need proof." "Proof? How?" A man like that, Eli said, his mind working. He has papers, a ledger, a man who steals land. He has to have the fake surveys, the deeds. He'll have them locked up, proof of his land grabs, proof of who he's paid. Willa's eyes lit up. We find the proof. We expose him. We save the town. And then, Eli said, turning to her, we leave, together. Her breath caught. Leave? Together. We go north, Oregon, or Washington Territory. Somewhere with green grass. Somewhere they've never heard the name Amos Grant or Eli Maddox. It was a plan. It was thin as smoke, but it was theirs. We'll need help, Eli said. His office won't be in town. It'll be at his ranch, guarded. Who? Willa asked. My friend, Tobin, the scout. He knows this land. He knows the cattle trails. He can watch Hayes. He can find a way in. Eli went to the window. He looked out at the hostile town. It was still his enemy, but now he had a reason to fight, and he had a reason to live. He slipped out the back before dawn and met Tobin in the hills. He explained the plan. Tobin was quiet for a long time. This is a wasp's nest. Eli, you're not just kicking it. You're trying to steal the queen. I'm burning it, Eli corrected. Will you help? Tobin looked at his friend. He saw the man Eli had been, the runner, the ghost, and he saw the man he was now, focused, alive, and dangerous. The woman, Tobin said. She got to you. She did, Eli said. There was no shame in it. Tobin nodded, a rare, thin smile touching his lips. Hayes's main ranch is 10 miles west of here. He keeps his office in the main house. I've seen it. He's got 2 men on the porch, day and night, but he's got a weakness. What? He trusts his own men, but he doesn't trust the land. I know the land. The town of Drybone was sitting on a lit fuse. The days that followed Eli's return were a kind of heavy, unbreathable calm, the silence before a lightning strike. Hayes and his men rode through the streets, their presence an open threat. Marshal Brody sat on the porch of the assayer's office, cleaning his rifle, his gaze fixed on the arid heart. The miners were trapped. They were too poor to leave and too scared to stay. They gathered in the saloon, but they drank little. They just sat, their faces gray, watching the door, waiting for the inevitable. Eli stayed. He and Willa moved in a quiet, tense orbit. He slept in room number 2, but his nights were spent with her, his hand on his pistol, listening. Tobin was a ghost in the hills, watching Hayes's ranch, waiting for an opportunity that never seemed to come. The air grew so thick with fear that Willa could no longer stand it. It was late afternoon, the saloon half full of defeated men. Eli was by the window, watching Brody. Hayes and 2 of his ranchers were at a table, drinking, their laughter loud and insulting. This town is dead, Hayes announced, slamming his glass down. It's just waiting for us to bury it, and the rats who live in it. A miner named Pip, a young man who had been Gannon's friend, looked down at his hands. Willa, who was wiping the bar, stopped. The rag in her hand was still. She looked at the men. She saw their hopelessness. She saw the defeat that had lived in her own heart for years, and she felt something snap. She put the rag down. She walked from behind the bar and stood in the middle of the room. The saloon went quiet. Even Hayes stopped laughing. He's right, Willa said, her voice clear and carrying. It did not tremble. The miners looked up, stunned. Eli turned from the window. This town is dead, she said, looking at Pip. It died when we let men like him. She pointed a steady finger at Hayes. Make us afraid. It died when we let them hang Silas Gannon from a beam and call it justice. It died when we started whispering instead of talking. When we started hiding instead of living. You shut your mouth, girl, Hayes growled, his hand moving to his gun. No, Willa said. I've been shutting my mouth my whole life. I was told to be quiet by my father. I was told to be quiet by the men who shamed me. I've lived in the shadows, letting men like you define me, letting you call me a curse, letting you call us rats. She turned to the miners. Her eyes were burning. "Look at yourselves. We are not rats. We are not dirt under his boots. We are men. We are women. We dig. We work, we bleed, and we deserve to live without fear." "She's right," a voice called out. It was the blacksmith, a big man named Tom. He stood up. "We've let this bully push us too far." "They've got the law," Pip whispered, terrified. "That's not law," Willa said, her voice dropping, full of contempt as she looked at Hayes. "That's just a badge he bought. Real law is what we decide. It's what we stand up for, or we are nothing. We're just ghosts." Hayes stood, his chair crashing to the floor. "You've said enough, you cursed whore!" Before Hayes could take a step, Eli was there. He moved from the window, his hand not on his gun, but simply his presence. A wall between Hayes and Willa. "She's speaking," Eli said, his voice deadly quiet. "Let her finish." Hayes looked at Eli. He looked at the blacksmith, who had balled his fists. He looked at the miners, who were, for the first time, looking angry instead of scared. He saw that the room had shifted. He sneered. "Talk is cheap. When you're done, I'll be outside." He and his men stalked out of the saloon, leaving a vibrating silence behind. The spell was broken. The room divided. Half the miners got up, terrified, and scurried out the door. But the other half, a dozen or so, stayed. They looked at Willa. They were still afraid, but they were looking at her with something new, respect. "What do we do, Miss Grant?" the blacksmith asked. "We get the proof," Eli said, stepping forward. "We prove what he is. My friend is watching his ranch. We need to find his ledgers. We need to expose him." "We're with you," Tom said. That night, the plan was set. Tobin would slip onto the ranch under the cover of a moonless sky. Eli would wait at the edge of the property, ready to cover his retreat. Willa stood with Eli at the back door of the saloon. The alley was dark. "This is wrong," she whispered, her hands gripping his arms. "He knows you're here. He's expecting this. It's a trap." "It's the only way," Eli said. He cupped her face. "Stay here. Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone." "Eli," her voice broke. Don't be him. Don't be Ethan. Don't die trying to prove you're right." He looked at her. He finally understood what she had accused him of. "I'm not," he said. "I'm not running. And I'm not dying. I'm coming back to you. I'm coming back to what's true." He kissed her, a hard, fast kiss. Then he melted into the darkness. Willa barred the door, and she began to wait. The wait was a torment. It was worse than Santa Fe. It was worse than her father's sermons. It was a black, suffocating pit. She paced the saloon. She tried to clean glasses, but her hands were shaking so badly she dropped one, and it shattered on the floor. She left the mess. She went to the front window, peering through the slit in the curtains. The town was dark. Brody was gone from his post. The silence was absolute. She thought of the gunfire that had killed Ethan. She imagined Eli, alone in the dark. She imagined Hayes. She imagined a shot. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Her eyes closed, praying to a God she hated. "Don't take him. Don't you dare take him." Hours passed. 1 o'clock. 2. The moon had set. She was in her room, sitting on the edge of the bed, when she heard it. A scrape. At the back door. Her heart stopped. She grabbed the scattergun she kept behind the bar. She ran down the stairs. Another scrape. A low, desperate knock. "Willa." It was his voice, broken. She fumbled with the bar, her hands slick with sweat. She tore the door open. He fell in. Eli collapsed across the threshold, and he was not alone. He was dragging Tobin, who was unconscious, an arrow protruding from his thigh. "Bar the door," Eli gasped, shoving Tobin's body clear. Willa slammed the door and dropped the heavy bar. She turned, her heart in her throat. They were waiting. Eli grunted. He was bleeding. A long, dark gash ran from his temple down his cheek. He had a wound on his shoulder, a bright red stain spreading across his shirt. "A trap, just like you said," Eli, you're— Tobin first, he ordered. They dragged the scout into the main room. Willa lit a lamp, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 matches. The sight was horrific. Tobin was pale, his breathing shallow. "The arrow," Eli said. "We have to push it through." Willa's stomach turned, but she nodded. She tore a strip from a clean bar towel. Eli knelt, gritted his teeth, and with a guttural sound, snapped the shaft of the arrow, then shoved the pointed end through Tobin's leg. Tobin's body convulsed, but he did not wake. Willa bound the wound tight. "He'll live," Eli said, slumping against the bar. "He took this for me. They had a rifle. I didn't see him." Now she looked at him. The adrenaline was fading, and he was pale. His shoulder was soaked. "Sit," she commanded, her voice steel. She ran upstairs and came back with her sewing kit and a bottle of carbolic. She tore his shirt open. It was a bullet, a graze, deep and raw, across the muscle of his shoulder. It had torn the flesh, but it had passed through. "You're a lucky fool," she whispered, her voice choked with relief. She got a bowl of hot water from the stove's reservoir. She brought it to the table. She dipped a clean rag in the water. Eli sat, his head bowed, his body slumped in exhaustion. He was watching her. She knelt beside him. She began to clean the wound. She bent to her work, her hair falling forward, her movements gentle, precise. She had to clean the dirt and powder from the torn skin. He watched her. He watched the curve of her back as she leaned over him. He remembered that first day. The coin, the jolt of raw, simple lust. It felt like a lifetime ago. It felt like it had happened to another man. Now, as she bent, he felt something else. A warmth. Yes, but it was not heat. It was a profound, aching tenderness that filled his chest and throat. He watched her hands, the same hands that counted coin and fought off drunks, move with an impossible gentleness, cleaning his wound. Her touch so light it barely hurt. He saw the concentration in her face, the way her brow furrowed. She was saving him. She had saved him. He was not looking at her body. He was looking at her, and in the dim light of the saloon, surrounded by danger, with a half-dead man on his floor, Eli Maddox knew, with an absolute certainty, that he loved her. She finished binding the wound, pulling the bandage tight. She looked up. Her face was streaked with his blood and her own tears. "You came back," she whispered. "I told you I would," he whispered back. They stayed like that, kneeling on the saloon floor. The world shrunk to the few inches between them. The lamp cast a small, golden circle of light around them. "Eli," she said, her voice so low he barely heard it. She did not move. If we live, if we survive this," she took a shaky breath. "I don't want to be the preacher's girl. I don't want to be Willa Grant, the saloon keeper. I just want to be yours." She looked down at her hands, red with his blood. "If you'll have me, with all of it, the past, the name, the scars." He reached out and put his good hand on her cheek. He made her look at him. "Willa Grant," he said, his voice thick. "I don't want a ghost. I don't want a clean slate. I want you. I want your name. I want your past, because it made you. I want your breath in the morning. I want your fight. I want your fire." He leaned in, his own face cut and bruised, his shoulder aching. "You're all I want." She surged forward, her mouth finding his. They kissed. It was not a kiss of passion or of desperation. It was a kiss of arrival. It was a promise sealed. It was 2 broken halves becoming one solid thing. And as they kissed, a low, distant rumble shook the glass in the windows. Willa pulled back, her eyes wide. "What was that?" Eli listened. It came again, closer this time, a deep, rolling crack. "Thunder," he said, a slow, grim smile touching his cut lip. "A storm's coming." It was the final reckoning. The next day, the sky was a bruised, dark purple. The air was electric, the wind sharp. The storm had held off, waiting. just like them. Tobin was alive. He was delirious with fever, but he was alive, hidden in Willa's room. "It's over," Eli said. He was standing at the bar, checking his pistol. His shoulder was stiff. But it worked. "What are you doing?" Willa asked, her blood running cold. "There's no more proof to get. They're dug in. They'll come for us tonight. They'll burn this place, with us in it. I'm not waiting." "Eli, no, you can't. Not a duel. That's what he wants." "I'm not giving him a duel," Eli said. He strapped his holster to his hip. "I'm giving him justice. I'm calling him out. In front of the town. In front of everyone. He'll kill you. He's a killer." "So am I," Eli said. He looked at her, his eyes clear and calm. He had run from his brother's death. He had run from himself. He was done. "I love you, Willa. You stay here. Lock the door. No matter what you hear." He kissed her. Once. Hard. And he walked out. He walked into the center of the street. The town was empty, the wind whipping dust devils past the buildings. "Hayes!" Eli's voice boomed, echoing off the false fronts. "You wanted this town, you coward? Come and take it, or are you going to hide behind your badge and your hired guns?" A door opened. Hayes stepped off the boardwalk, a long cigar in his mouth. He was smiling. Marshal Brody and 2 other men fanned out behind him. "Well, well," Hayes said. "The hero, come to die." "I came to finish this," Eli said. He stood in the middle of the street, his hand loose at his side. "Just you and me. Hayes, let your dogs go." Hayes laughed. "You think this is a game?" "It is," Eli said. "And you lost the town." "Look." Hayes looked. The miners, the blacksmith, the stable boy. They were coming out. They were standing on the boardwalks, watching. Willa's speech had worked. They were afraid, but they were there. Hayes saw it. He saw his control slipping. He saw the only way to get it back. "Fine," Hayes sneered. He took the cigar from his mouth and dropped it. "Fine, let's finish it." He and Eli faced each other. 20 paces. The wind died. The world went silent, holding its breath. Willa watched from the window, her knuckles pressed against her mouth, her heart a stone. Hayes went for his gun. He was fast, but Eli was faster. Eli drew, fired. One motion, one shot. Hayes staggered, his eyes wide with shock. He looked down at the red flower blooming on his white shirt. He fell, face first, into the dust. "Justice!" A woman in the crowd screamed. "The blacksmith! Tom let out a roar!" Eli stood, his gun smoking, his arm steady. Willa sobbed. A single, sharp gasp of relief. Then the second shot rang out. It came from the roof of the assayer's office. "A rifle!" Eli grunted, a sound of pure surprise. He looked down. A dark stain was spreading. Fast, on his left side. He pressed his hand to it. He looked up, toward the roof. He saw Marshal Brody lowering his rifle. Eli's legs buckled. He fell to his knees, then pitched forward onto the ground, not far from Hayes. "No!" Willa's scream was not human. It was a sound of pure, ripped-apart animal rage. She burst through the batwing doors. She didn't care about Brody. She didn't care about the guns. She ran to Eli. She skidded to her knees in the dirt beside him. She rolled him over. His eyes were open, but they were glazed, staring at the purple sky. Blood was pouring from his side, covering his hand. She grabbed him, pulling his head into her lap. Blood soaked her hands, her apron. "Eli!" she screamed, shaking him. No, you promised. You promised you were coming back." She put her hand over his wound, pressing hard, as if she could hold his life in. "Eli, stay awake, damn you! Stay awake! Stay with me!" Willa's scream was a tear in the fabric of the world. It was a sound of such profound animal loss that the town, frozen by the duel's outcome, snapped into motion. "He shot him!" Tom, the blacksmith, roared. His voice was a hammer on an anvil. He pointed not at Hayes' body, but at the roof of the assayer's office. "Brody, the marshal! He shot him from the roof! It's a murder!" The crowd, which had been stunned into silence by Eli's victory, now turned. their collective gaze moving to the riflemen. They had just witnessed a man win a fair fight, only to be ambushed by the law. Marshal Brody stood, his face a mask of panic. He had miscalculated. He had assumed the town would see the death of two outlaws. Instead, they saw a hero, their hero, murdered by a coward. "He ain't getting away," a voice rasped. From the window of the arid heart, Tobin, his face pale with fever, leveled Eli's rifle. He fired. The shot kicked up splinters a foot from Brody's boots. The marshal jumped back. Trapped. The spell of fear was broken. The dam of resentment and anger that Hayes had built finally burst. "Get him!" Pip, the young miner, yelled. He grabbed a pickaxe handle from a wagon. "That's for Silas, and for Maddox." The crowd surged. Tom the blacksmith and a dozen miners, the same men Willa's speech had stirred, stormed the assayer's office. They did not pause. They kicked the door from its hinges. But Willa saw none of it. She was on her knees in the dust, her hands soaked in the hot, dark blood pouring from Eli's side. "No, no, no," she chanted, pressing her palms uselessly against the wound. You stay with me. You promised." Eli's eyes were open, but they saw nothing. His breathing was a shallow, wet rattle. "Help me!" she screamed at the town. "Damn you, help me!" Tom and Pip burst from the crowd, their fury momentarily forgotten. They saw her, covered in his blood, her face a mask of terror. "He's alive!" she yelled. "He's breathing! Get him inside! Now!" They were gentle. Tom, a man who could bend iron, lifted Eli as if he were a child. They carried him into the saloon. Through the bat-wing doors he had walked out of only minutes before. They laid him on one of the heavy oak tables. "Water," Willa commanded. "Boil it, and whiskey, the good stuff, and my sewing kit. From my room." Pip ran to obey. Tom looked at her, his face grim. "Miss Grant, it's bad." "Get the water," she said, her voice a low, hard command. She was no longer a victim. She was a general. She ripped Eli's shirt open. The wound was a dark, bubbling hole high on his left side. The bullet was deep. It had missed his heart, but it was in his lung. She heard a commotion outside. The miners were dragging Brody into the street. They were shouting for a rope. "Tom," she said, her voice sharp. He turned. "No, no more hanging. Lock him in his own cell. Do it now. We do this right. For Eli." Tom looked at the man bleeding on his table, and then at the woman whose eyes were burning with a cold, clear fire. He nodded. "Aye, ma'am." He ran back outside, bellowing, "To the jail! Lock him up!" Willa was alone with Eli. She leaned down, her ear to his mouth. She could feel his breath, faint, but there. "You don't get to run. Eli Maddox," she whispered, her lips brushing his ear, her tears falling onto his bloody cheek. "You hear me? You don't get to die. I won't let you." Pip returned with the kettle and the whiskey. She did not hesitate. She had seen gunshot wounds before, in the saloon, but never like this, never on him. She washed her hands. She poured whiskey onto the wound, and Eli's body arched in a silent, unconscious spasm of agony. She took a long, thin knife from the bar, held it in the steam from the kettle, and then her jaw set. She began to work. She had to find the bullet. She did not sleep for 3 nights. She did not leave his side. She had moved him to her own bed, the one he had shared with her. She sat in the chair beside it, her hands, her apron, her dress, all stained with his blood. She probed for the bullet, her hand steady even as her heart was breaking. She found it, a flattened piece of lead, lodged against a rib. She pulled it free. She stitched the wound with her own sewing needle, the black thread stark against his pale skin. He burned with fever. He thrashed, lost in a red, painful world, calling out names. "Ethan, Ethan, I'm sorry." And then, just once, "Willa, run." "I'm here," she whispered, holding his hand, wiping his face with a cool, damp cloth. "I'm not running, and neither are you." Downstairs, the town she had saved, and he had redeemed, was coming back to life. With Hayes dead and Brody in chains, the hold of the cattlemen was broken. Tom and Pip, acting as a town council, had gone to Hayes's ranch. They found the ledgers. They found the proof of the Miller homestead fire, the orders to hang Gannon, the payments to Brody. A new territorial marshal rode in from Santa Fe. He was an older, harder man, one who could not be bought. He read the ledgers. He listened to Tobin, who was recovering in room number 3, his leg propped on a pillow. He listened to Tom, and he listened to Willa. He looked at this pale, exhausted woman, and he saw not the cursed preacher's girl, but the woman who had held a town together. He officially took Brody into federal custody. The remaining men from Hayes's crew scattered, vanishing into the desert. The siege of Drybone was over. On the 7th day, Eli's fever broke. He woke up. The room was quiet. The light was soft. He smelled lye soap and, faintly, the scent of her. He tried to move, and a white-hot fire shot through his side. He grunted. A head lifted from the edge of the bed. Willa was asleep in the chair, her arms folded on the mattress, her head resting on them. She had been holding his hand. She looked worn. There were dark circles under her eyes. She was thinner, but she was there. He squeezed her hand. It was the only part of him that would move. Her eyes flew open. She looked at him. She saw his eyes, clear and sane. Looking back at her, she did not cry. She did not smile. She just let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound of such profound relief it was almost a prayer. "You damned fool," she whispered, her voice rough from lack of use. "I told you he'd kill you." "He missed," Eli rasped. His throat was raw. "I didn't," she said. "I got the bullet. You've been asleep for a week." He looked at her, really looked at her. She was not the saloon girl he had met. She was not the haunted woman at the ruins. She was magnificent. "You saved me," he said. "You saved me first," she replied. The same words he would say to her later. She touched the gash on his cheek. Now a healing scar. "Now, don't talk. I'll make you some broth." His recovery was slow. The town healed with him. Jedediah Crouch, the saloon's silent owner, passed away in his sleep during the week Eli was lost in his fever. When the new marshal unsealed his papers, he found a simple, clear will. Jedediah, in his paralysis, had seen and understood everything. He left the arid heart, its stock, its building, and its name, to Willa Grant, the only one who earned it. Weeks later, the saloon reopened. The bat-wing doors swung wide, but it was not the same place. Willa stood behind the bar, but she was not a servant. She was the proprietor. She was Miss Grant. She stood taller. The wall she had built around herself was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable confidence. The miners, the blacksmith, the few families who lived in the town, they treated her with a new, profound respect. They had seen her face down Hayes. They had seen her run into the street, into the gunfire. They had seen her, covered in blood, take command. The whispers about the preacher's girl were dead. She was no longer hiding. She was home. Eli healed. The wound in his side left a puckered, angry scar, and a deep ache that came with the cold. He would walk with a limp for the rest of his life, a slight drag of his left leg, a constant reminder. He could have left. They had money. The saloon was making a good living. They could have sold it and taken the road to Oregon. But he looked at the land. He looked at the town that had, in its own broken way, adopted him. He looked at Tobin, who was now walking with a cane. "Hayes choked this country," Eli said one afternoon. Standing on the saloon porch, "He did." Tobin agreed. "He left cattle. He left grass. And he left a lot of men who need work." Eli Maddox, the man who had run from his own ranch, found himself, by some strange turn of the world, building a new one. He and Tobin, with help from Tom and the miners, rounded up what was left of Hayes's herd. They didn't claim it for themselves. They used the money from Hayes's own ledgers, the stolen money the marshal had seized, and they bought the land legally. They created a town cooperative. Eli was a cattleman again. He worked from the saddle, his limp forgotten when he was on his mare. He was teaching the miners how to ride, how to manage a herd. He was no longer running from Ethan's ghost. He was living the life his brother would have wanted, a life built not on a single patch of dirt, but on a community. He had found his purpose. It was spring, 6 months after the shooting. The high desert, which had been so harsh and unforgiving, exploded in a rare, vibrant bloom of yellow poppies and purple sage. Eli, his limp more pronounced after a long day of branding, walked into the saloon in the middle of the afternoon. It was quiet. Willa was at her desk. The real ledger, her ledger, open before her. The numbers were all in the black. "Close the book, Willa," he said. She looked up, a small, startled smile touching her lips. "Eli, you're back early. Is something wrong?" "No," he said. The grimness he had worn for so long was gone. His eyes were clear. "Something's right. Ride with me. Ride. Now. I have to. The numbers can wait." He took her hand and pulled her, gently, to her feet. She untied her apron, a motion that was no longer one of servitude, but one of habit. He had her horse, a sturdy gray mare, saddled and waiting next to his. He didn't tell her where they were going. He just led her out of the town they had rebuilt, away from the saloon, into the quiet of the open plains. He led her to the ruins. The crumbling adobe walls were covered in new green vines. The air was sweet. Willa reined in her horse. A shadow of the old fear crossed her face. "Eli, why are we here? This place—" "It's just a place," he said, swinging down from his mare. He winced as his boot hit the ground. He walked to her and held up his arms. "Come." She slid down into his embrace. He held her for a moment, his face buried in her hair. "This is where you came to pray for silence," he said. She stiffened. "How did you know?" "I know you," he said simply. He led her to the broken stone altar, the one where she had lit her candle. It was not a place of ghosts anymore. It was just sun-warmed stone. He reached into the pocket of his denim trousers. He pulled out a small, simple band of hammered silver. He had traded a wolf pelt for it with a Navajo smith. He set the ring on the flat altar. Willa stared at it. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. She looked from the ring to his face. He turned to her. His face was scarred. His body was broken in places, but his eyes were whole. "You deserved a vow a long time ago," he said, his voice rough. "A real one that wasn't a lie. I'm here to make it now." She couldn't speak. The tears that she thought were long gone, the tears that had dried up in Santa Fe, began to fall. They were not the hot, silent tears of the storeroom. They were a warm, quiet rain. I don't have a dress," she whispered, looking down at her practical skirt and blouse. There's no preacher." "We don't need a preacher," Eli said, a small, fierce smile touching his lips. "We've had enough preachers in our lives. We just need this." He gestured to the vast, open sky, a blue deeper than any ocean. He took her hand. He picked up the silver ring. He slid it onto her finger. It was cool. It was solid. Eli Maddox," he said, his voice steady. "Take you. Willa Grant. I take your name. I take your past. I take all your scars." He held her gaze. "And I will not run. I will stand with you from this day." Willa was crying, her shoulders shaking, but she was smiling. Willa Grant," she said, her voice thick but strong, her grip tight on his hand. "Take you. Eli Maddox. I take your ghosts. I take your honor. I take your limp." She smiled through her tears. "And I will be your home. Always." He pulled her to him. He kissed her. A long, deep kiss that tasted of salt and silver and the new, clean air of the desert. They were not alone. Tobin stood by the horses, his hat in his hand. Tom the blacksmith and young Pip were there, too, their faces split in wide grins. A handful of friends, a new family. Eli held her as she wept into his shirt. He stroked her hair. "You saved me first," he whispered, his voice thick, his own eyes wet. "You saved me from him. From Ethan's ghost. You saved me from myself." The last scene was not an end. It was a beginning. They rode together, side by side, on the high plains. The sun was setting, painting the sky in strokes of violent gold and deep, peaceful purple. Eli rode his mare, his body moving with the easy grace of a man who was born to the saddle. His limp was gone. Willa rode beside him. She was not the saloon girl in the brown dress. She was a woman of the West, her hair in a long braid, her face turned toward the horizon. They were scarred. He had the mark on his face, the ache in his side. She had the pale, silver lines on her back, the ones he had kissed until she no longer felt them. They were not perfect. They were real. They were two outcasts, the drifter who had run from death and the woman who had been cast out by her faith. They had survived the West. They had survived its cruelty, its greed, and its judgment. They had not done it by running or by hiding. They had done it by standing their ground and by loving boldly. In a land that gave nothing for free, they rode toward the small ranch house they were building, their shadows long behind them, two figures melting into the golden light. He came to pay a debt, but stayed for the woman who made him forget the price. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And where in the world you're listening from, please let me know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this one. Thank you again. Please share your thoughts in English.